So we learned how France became a Christian kingdom, but how did Britain become Christian? A Christian monk by the name of Patrick landed in Ireland, and his purpose, his mission, was to convert the Celts to become Christian. And one day, as Patrick was preaching to the Celtic people, trying to explain how there was just one God, but that God was made up of three parts, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, a Celtic man raised his hand and he's like, I don't understand. You're saying there's one God, but you're talking about three gods? I don't understand. And Patrick's like, okay, hold on. So he reached down and he picked up a shamrock, a clover. Patrick said, how many leaves am I holding? And the Celtic man said, one. And Patrick's like, good, one leaf. How many parts on that leaf? 3. And Patrick's like, yes, good, there are 3 parts to this one leaf. Just like there are 3 parts to one God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But what about England? How did Christianity reach there? Well, it was around the same time, in 597, that Pope Gregory I sent 40 monks to England to do the same thing Patrick did, to convert the people living there, to convert not only the Celts, but the Angles and the Saxons, which ultimately made England Christian as well. Unlike France, in the 800s, Britain was still divided into many kingdoms. In the deep south, there was the kingdom of Wessex and the kingdom of East Anglia. They were the descendants basically of the Angles. To the west, there was the kingdom of Wales, the descendants of the native Celts. To the northeast was Northumbria, and above that was Scotland. It was during this time period that there was an Icelandic people from Denmark that was invading England from the north, and they conquered Northumbria. These people were called the Danes. These Danes were Vikings. They pushed south. They conquered Wales, they conquered Mercia, they conquered East Anglia, until ultimately there was only one last kingdom, and that was the kingdom of Wessex. And there was a king named Alfred who would become known as Alfred the Great, because Alfred fought back. He would not let his people quit.
Today, we make the pagans wish they had never heard of Wessex. Today, we fight for Wessex! No mercy!
They fought the Vikings. They drove them out of Wessex. They drove them out of East Anglia. East Anglia and Wessex ultimately unite and become one. And they continue to fight back, fight back, fight back.
One day, it is my hope that all kingdoms will become one, united under one God. All that remains of England is Wessex. The birth of an England, the idea of a single kingdom called England, has to begin here.
But it won't be until Alfred the Great's grandson that the last of the Danes would be conquered and driven out of England. And his grandson's name is Ethelstan. And it'll be Ethelstan that will receive the credit for uniting all the kingdoms of England. So like King Clovis was the first king of France, King Ethelstan was the first king of England. In the far frigid north, in the land of Scandinavia, the people were suffering from a mini ice age. They were having great difficulty growing their crops, and everything was getting frozen under the tundra, so the people were looking elsewhere to colonize, to create a future for their people. So they were going to take this land by force. Their warriors were called Vikings. There were 3 types of Vikings. The Vikings from Norway were called the Norse, Norsemen, or Northmen. They were the first to start targeting England. And among all the Vikings, England was their favorite target, because every town, village, and hamlet in England is within a stone's throw of a river. There is an entire webbed network of rivers through England. And so that was the Vikings' favorite place to hit. And their favorite target within England were the monasteries, because they were unguarded and they were the treasure troves of medieval times. So the Norse started hitting Northumbria in England first. They had built these longboats. The Viking longboat was very seaworthy. Not only was it sturdy and able to handle the rough waters of the English Channel, but the hull was very shallow, so it could go down narrow streams and rivers to attack deep into the heart of England. The Norse were basically just raiders. They would loot and pillage the monasteries and then head out. But in their wake came another invasion, an invasion from another Viking people from Denmark. They were called the Danes, and it was the Danes that conquered nearly all of England except Wessex. And ultimately they were driven out by Alfred the Great. But that only sustained England from invasion for another century and a half, because in northern France there was a Viking colony called Normandy. The Vikings had conquered it and established their own kingdom. But in the 11th century, the Normans wanted more. And under their ruler, King William the Conqueror, unlike the Norse, unlike the Danes, will be successful and conquer England and make it a Norman country. For centuries, the Normans and Saxons will butt heads in battle, but ultimately, a few generations down the road, the cultures blend and they become one people, and England becomes a powerhouse on the world stage. And at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, William the Conqueror, Norman king, Viking king, becomes ruler of both Normandy and England. All right, let's take a look at one last country during early medieval times, and that's Spain. In the year 711, the year the Slurpee was invented. I'm joking. Though, remember, on July 11th, 7/11, you get a free Slurpee at 7-Eleven. Product placement. But in the year 711, a Muslim crusading army from North Africa invaded Spain. The Spaniards called them the Moors, and the Moors will conquer Spain. And for the next 700 years, Spain becomes a Muslim country. Muslim Spain is called al-andalus, and the city of Cordoba is its capital. In Cordoba, non-Muslims were treated as second-class citizens. For instance, they had to pay an extra tax called a jizya. And if you weren't Muslim, job opportunities were very limited. But despite all that, al-Andalus, unlike the rest of Western Europe, became very advanced. There were a lot of technological breakthroughs. There were new ideas and new thoughts coming out of Cordoba that's going to benefit ultimately all of Western Europe. Grandiose libraries are going to spring up, like the House of Wisdom. But more on all of that in the next unit when we study Islam. So until then,